time is probably the very top when it comes to getting into absolutely gnarly condition. And I can say from personal experience, it took until my third competitive season in terms of like dieting to get down to absolutely walnut glutes.
So let's get into the real stuff. What is being done? Now, obviously, it's a step-by-step process to get into, absolutely phenomenal contest shape and peaking for a show. So maybe we can start with how to get extra dicey first, because when you're extra diced, super shredded, you don't need to do all the crazy stuff that people think that the pros are doing. Let's start with Dean, because Dean did like 8 shows back to back and he kept improving. So Dean, spill the beans.
I think last year was just an N=1, I guess, because like we discussed several times, not once did my diet change, not once did I have to do extra cardio. The drug setup never really changed. It was just, I can't personally explain how week to week I was losing body fat based on what I was eating and doing, but I guess years of dieting, your body just has that innate ability to go back to a low set point. So I guess the main piece of advice is doing repeated diets until you get to that desired body fat level. Like if you're an amateur and you're aiming for your first 1 to 2 shows, unless you want to end up looking like a skeleton, it's highly unlikely you're getting on stage with stray glutes. Unless you really want to diet for a long period of time, where you're giving yourself sufficient diet breaks to reset and maintenance and then go again. You could be looking at maybe dieting for the best part of a year and a half to give yourself sufficient time to get to a new set point, hold it with maintenance, go down another little touch. So last year was probably the culmination of 10 years of doing diets like that. And I can say from personal experience, it took until my third competitive season in terms of like dieting to get down to absolutely walnut glutes. And that again there's nothing magically changed other than getting to a new set point, going into an off season after competing, and then going back into a dieting phase. So time is probably the very top when it comes to getting into absolutely gnarly condition. And then I guess some of it is genetics. You could be unfortunate in terms of skin genetics, and like we've all joked about, like thicker collagen, so you don't end up with that sort of thinness to the muscle or to the look of the physique. You could have different distribution of alpha receptors throughout your body, so you could have issues getting your glutes in, your quads, your lower back. And that can just take time of repeated dieting and then using alpha receptor blockers like yohimbine or royalcine or alpha-yohimbine to help you release the fatty acids out of those cells to mobilize them. But I guess with even the other thing about time is not doing crazy things of like dropping to 600, 700 calories, thinking that a huge deficit is going to yield you huge fat loss. Because the only thing that will suffer then in that case is your training intensity, and then you'll start losing muscle mass, and then your appetite starts increasing, and then you're sort of left trying to figure out, how do I fix this mess? So having even the patience to slowly manipulate the diet over time or manipulate output from cardio just reiterates the point of patience.
You think a lot of guys don't have patience nowadays because they want to stay full, when in reality the first couple of diets that you need to go through there, you need to go a little bit flatter to really get shredded, because you don't have that muscle maturity and density yet, and maybe not the financial means to go on a heavy cycle, or your body can't even tolerate it to stay full. Because you have a lot of pros now, they look insanely full the entire contest prep through. And then maybe the guys that are in the beginning of their contest prep career, they think that they need to stay full and large and in charge, but in reality, they need to suffer a little bit more and get really down to get all that fat off. I see that more often than not nowadays, where the guys just don't want to get, to a point where they're flat for weeks on end, when that used to be the norm.
Yeah. The other thing about patience is you'll find with newer athletes, asking questions about refeeds. When am I getting a refeed? Oh, I'm feeling a little flat. When am I getting a refeed? I think I need more carbs. Instead of just seeing out the process that, there's some days where it's going to absolutely suck. and you're going to be flat, and it's going to be difficult to get a pump no matter how hydrated or how balanced your sodium potassium is. You're going to be fatigued depending on your sleep if that's not in a good position. And it's really just down to string a load of those sucky days together before you get to a point where your physique probably warrants then a refeed, or your training performance warrants a refeed. And even then, it's probably a refeed where you're going back to maintenance calories from increased carbs, where you're not breaking out into like an all-day splurge of whatever fits in your mouth and having a full-on like
skip load
cheat
for
day.
8 hours.
Yeah, skip load. which
does work though if you have some experience, but for the beginners, it's
absolutely works. But then you've got beginners looking at a protocol like that and thinking that they can eat boxes of cereal, eat cookies all day. It's really the physique dependent, metabolism dependent. Because the worst thing you could do is have a high refeed day like that, where you completely overspill. You end up creating new fat cells when the whole point was to just top up glycogen so that for the next 4 to 5 days of training, you have sufficient glycogen to produce maximal force to get you back to a good position of retaining the tissue whilst losing the body fat. So the whole refeed thing is another part to contest prep that you get questioned so many times of, when should I refeed? How often should I refeed? And like last year's anomaly, if anything, Callum had to keep giving me high days every 4 to 5 days because the physique just kept quickly flattening out to how well my body was utilizing fatty acids for energy. And that was all down to training intensity stayed absolutely 100% on par to off-season. So it really comes down to the patience. But again, it shows the value of off-season and being as meticulous with your eating and everything else in your off-season versus contest prep.
All right, John.
Yeah, I don't want to just bang the gong that Ding just rung, but with a lot of this, it is a time component. But I would say what's going to set up your next prep is what you do the moments after your last show. And I truly like the first week after someone's last competition can already set up like taking months off their off season to already then having an extended prep to pull off the fat. And I see guys just like that's where I've changed, at least, that being able to manage myself better post show by the end of this 8-week phase of like lower gear and starting to set up an off season. I'm at my leanest point that I'm able to also remove any type of maladaptations from prep. And that starts off season. So I'm very, very lean, a long runway to make progress in. And all those, what Dean just brought up was like routine. All those routine and habits that were built in prep, when you feel like you're a machine and you're just on it, you carry those into off season and post show, and those just never drop off to where you don't then get the inconsistencies to where this week, oh man, I jumped up 3 pounds and I get a little more body fat. And all those weeks start accruing to where your off season slowly slips away from you. So getting into a good position just to even start your prep begins with what you do right after your last show. And with that being said, then once you're into this prep situation, I like reverse engineer your timeline. To me, it's a math equation. Because why do people not get in shape? That's the question I would ask, right? And they run out of time. And then what do you do when you run out of time? Like Dean is saying, push down the gas. And so
all the
you
funky
do more
stuff
cardio.
we started off with.
Yeah, throw in the DMP, like up the trend, bring in the halo, and all of a sudden you're just accruing more fatigue, and someone just still is not getting there or starts stalling, and then you dig harder and nothing's happening. So the right timeline is essential. So I always start like assessing, like look at your current off-season start point, look at your last prep start point and your endpoints, and do the math of how much weight you have to pull off and what that rate is reasonably able to be. And then from there, I think Dean brought up a great point around refeeds, is that when you first start prep, you're not going to be that depleted to where training performance is slipping to justify having increases of food. What I prefer in beginning parts of prep is where you would have more fatigue buildup is still from like training, cardio. So I call it a de-output day. Think of it like a deload, but just removing the output side. So like once a week, I'll always have someone programmed in, like no cardio, very low steps, no training, to just drop off the fatigue. So, but in turn, we are also bringing someone closer to that maintenance calorie level by doing so. However, we're working on the output side over the input side to where we're not taking someone like D said, like way high in glycogen levels to where it takes days to get them back into like productive fat loss and losing time. Refeeds serve great purposes later on once you're lean and you're getting that glycogen depletion and training starts slipping. That's when the diet fatigue aspect really plays well to doing refeeds. But I think that's at least the fatigue management side along prep. And I struggle with that word fatigue management because a lot of people just don't even push hard enough to create enough fatigue for it to be a problem. So